In 1565, the most powerful empire on Earth launched a full-scale invasion of a tiny Mediterranean island. 40,000 Ottoman soldiers, hundreds of ships, the finest artillery of the age, waiting for them. 6,000 defenders, surrounded, outnumbered, and completely alone. No escape, no mercy. This was not meant to be a battle. It was meant to be an execution. What followed became one of the most astonishing last stands in military history. This is the Great Siege of Malta.
Ever wondered how a tiny island could change the course of history? Let's travel back to the 16th century. In the heart of the sparkling Mediterranean Sea, a small but mighty island nation holds the key to an empire's ambition, Malta. Look at its position on the map. A strategic jewel set between the shores of Europe and North Africa. To the west, the formidable power of Spain. To the east, the ever-expanding Ottoman Empire. A force seemingly unstoppable. For the Ottomans, Malta wasn't just a speck in the sea. It was a stepping stone. A critical fortress that stood directly in their path to dominate the Mediterranean. This tiny island was about to become the stage for one of history's most epic confrontations. What happened next would echo for centuries. Stick around to find out. By the mid-1500s, one empire stood above all others. The Ottoman Empire was at its absolute zenith, an unstoppable force of conquest. Under the legendary Suleiman the Magnificent, Ottoman armies had swept across the known world. The ancient city of Constantinople had fallen. Most of the Balkans were under their control. They dominated huge portions of the Middle East and the coasts of North Africa. Their powerful fleets ruled the seas, striking fear deep into the heart of Christian Europe. Even Rome itself had been threatened, and the mighty walls of Vienna had faced an Ottoman siege. But the Ottomans were not finished. Their ambition was limitless. Their next grand objective, complete control of the Western Mediterranean. And to achieve that, one small but crucial island stood in their way. Malta had to fall. Were the Knights Hospital? Well, they weren't your average soldiers. Imagine warrior monks, trained from childhood in combat, discipline, and the brutal art of siege warfare, also known as the Knights of St. John. This hardened military order stood as a major obstacle to the Ottoman Empire. Decades before, they'd famously defended the island of Rhodes against a massive Ottoman invasion. Even though they were eventually forced to retreat, their ferocity earned them a fearsome reputation across the Mediterranean. In 1530, Emperor Charles V gave them a new home, the island of Malta. From this rocky outpost, the knights launched relentless raids on Ottoman ships. They captured valuable cargo, freed Christian slaves, and constantly humiliated the Sultan's powerful navy. To the great Sultan Suleiman, Malta wasn't just an island. It was a painful thorn in the side of his empire. A thorn that absolutely... In the year 1564, the aging but still formidable Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent made a momentous decision. He was tired of the Knights of St. John, a thorn in his side for decades, disrupting his trade routes and raiding his ships from their island fortress. The time for tolerance was over. Suleiman gave the order to assemble one of the largest and most powerful invasion forces the Mediterranean had ever seen. The objective was brutal and simple. Destroy the Knights of St. John completely, capture the strategic island of Malta, and transform it into a forward naval base for the Ottoman Empire. Everyone knew the stakes. Once Malta fell, the gateway to Europe would be wide open. The Italian coast, Sicily, and even the heart of Christendom, Rome itself, would be vulnerable to the Sultan's might. The invasion was set, and the fate of the Mediterranean hung in the balance. The year is 1565. Look to the horizon. An incredible sight fills the skeeter sails of the Ottoman fleet. A naval armada unlike anything seen before. By most estimates, it carried around 40,000 men. A truly fearsome force. Among them were the elite janissaries, crack marines, skilled engineers, and expert artillery crews. They were joined by the infamous corsairs from North Africa, bringing with them hundreds of cannons and massive siege guns, ready to pound fortresses into dust. And who stood against this overwhelming tide? A 6,000 defenders. This small group was made up of about 500 Knights of St. John, a few thousand Spanish and Italian regulars, and the brave Maltese militia and civilians. They were outnumbered almost 7 to 1. There was no rescue fleet coming from Unsif. One ever came at all. The stage was set for one of history's most desperate and legendary sieges. Picture this, 1565. The tiny island of Malta stands against the might of the Ottoman Empire. Its fate hangs by a thread, defended by just a few key strongholds. You have Fort St. Elmo, the vigilant guardian of the Grand Harbor. Then there's Burgu, the nerve center for the Knights of St. John, and the fortified peninsula of Singlia. The Ottoman strategy was simple. Take Fort St. Elmo, and fast. If it fell, their massive fleet could sail into the harbor, spelling doom for the rest of the island. The invaders were confident, betting St. Elmo would crumble in a matter of days. They couldn't have been more wrong. The story of this fort's defiance is legendary, a battle that would shape the course of history. How did they hold out? Stay tuned to find out. Imagine a fortress, a tiny star-shaped fort, standing against the might of the world's most powerful empire. This is the story of Fort St. Elmo and the beginning of the Great Siege of Malta in 1565. The Ottoman Empire, at the peak of its power, arrived with a massive fleet, intending to crush the Knights of St. John and take the strategic island. Their first target, the small, seemingly insignificant Fort St. Elmo. The Ottoman plan was simple. Obliterate the fort in a few days, and then move on to the main strongholds. They unleashed a hellish storm of cannon fire, day and night, without pause. Massive cannons pounded the stone walls. The sound was deafening, a constant thunder that shook the very foundations of the island. Under this relentless bombardment, the walls of St. Elmo began to crumble. Stone turned to dust, and fortifications built over decades were reduced to rubble. Inside the fort, the conditions were beyond nightmarish. The defenders, a mix of knights and Maltese soldiers, fought amidst clouds of choking dust and falling debris. The heat was suffocating. Water was desperately scarce. With every passing day, injuries mounted, wounds festered in the unsanitary conditions, and the dead piled up faster than they could be buried. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and death. Yet, they refused to yield. Every night, under the cloak of darkness, a sliver of hope arrived. Small boats would bravely slip across the Grand Harbor from the main forts of Burgu and Sing. They brought fresh soldiers, meager supplies, and evacuated the grievously wounded. It was a lifeline, but a fragile one. Every morning, with the first light of dawn, the Ottoman attacks would resume with renewed fury. The defenders' courage was legendary. When a soldier was too wounded to stand and fight, he wasn't taken to a hospital bed. Instead, he was carried to the breaches in the walls and propped up in a chair, weapon in hand. This grim spectacle was a psychological tactic, meant to show the Ottomans that the fort's defenses were still strong, that every man was still at his post. They were determined to fight to the very last breath. After more than a month of this non-stop, brutal fighting, the inevitable happened. Fort St. Elmo fell. The final assault was a massacre. Almost every single one of its defenders was killed, but their sacrifice was not in vain. The quick victory the Ottomans had planned had turned into a bloody, month-long struggle. They had lost thousands of their best soldiers, including many of their elite janissaries, just to take this one small fort. The cost was staggering, and it bought the main forces of the Knights precious, invaluable time. The fight for Malta had only just begun. Thanks for watching. If you found this story of incredible bravery, the fall of St. Elmo was a victory, but it came at a staggering cost. The Ottoman commanders, looking at the ruins and counting their dead, were stunned. What they thought would be a swift victory had turned into a month-long bloodbath, costing them thousands of their best soldiers. Morale plummeted. How could this tiny island garrison inflict such damage? As the summer heat intensified, their problems mounted. Supplies were running dangerously low, and with the extended siege, disease began to creep through their camp, claiming even more lives than the fighting. Yet, there was no turning back. Mustafa Pasha and Piali Pasha knew that abandoning the siege now would be an unthinkable humiliation. They had to see it through. With St. Elmo finally silenced, they turned their full, furious attention to the two remaining Christian strongholds, the fortresses of Burgu and Singlia. The real battle for Malta was about to begin. The battle for Malta reached a new, savage intensity. The Ottomans unleashed a furious storm of attacks, swarming from both land and sea. They constructed ingenious floating bridges to cross the harbors and threw up endless ladders against the crumbling, smoke-blackened walls. For a terrifying moment, the enemy broke through the defenses of single. Vicious hand-to-hand fighting exploded in the narrow streets. It was a fight for survival. Knights fought shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens. Priests, their robes stained with dust and sweat, rushed ammunition to the front lines. Even the wounded, bloodied and battered, refused to abandon their posts. And there, walking the battlements amidst the chaos, was the Grand Master himself, Hien de Balete, clad in full armor with his sword drawn. He was a beacon of defiance, roaring encouragement to his men. Malta would not surrender. Malta. Ever felt like you were at your breaking point? But the other guy was even worse off. That's exactly what was happening in this legendary siege. By August, both sides were on the verge of total collapse. Imagine this. The defenders, after months of fighting, were completely exhausted. Their supplies were gone. They were down to their last few bullets, barely hanging on. You'd think they were done for, right? Well, the Ottomans attacking them were in an even more desperate situation. The relentless summer heat was brutal. Disease was running rampant through their camps, and the constant, bloody losses from every failed attack had utterly crippled their army. They threw everything they had at the walls, and every single time, they were thrown back. It was a stalemate of pure exhaustion, and just when it seemed like it couldn't get any worse for the attackers, the final, decisive blow was about to land. Stick around to see how this incredible siege finally ended. Can you believe it? Oh. Early September 1565. After months of brutal fighting, the fate of Malta hung by a thread just when all seemed lost. A glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. A relief force from Sicily finally made landfall. Now, it wasn't a massive army, only a few thousand soldiers, but to the exhausted and demoralized Ottoman forces, it looked like the vanguard of a much larger Christian invasion. The Ottoman commanders, staring at the fortress walls they had failed to conquer for 4 long months, had to make a choice. They had lost too many men, too much time. The psychological blow of the relief force was the final straw. They decided to cut their losses. The invasion was over. The great Ottoman fleet turned its sails homeward, and against all odds, the tiny island of Malta had survived. And imagine an island utterly devastated. Entire towns, once bustling, are now nothing but rubble. The ground is soaked with the blood of thousands. The brave defenders, though they've won, are completely broken. This was the scene in Malta after the Great Siege of 1565. But this victory, paid for so dearly, sent shockwaves across the continent. The relentless march of the Ottoman Empire into Western Europe came to a grinding halt right here. For the first time in a long time, the Christian powers of Europe felt a surge of confidence. The battle shattered the myth that the Ottomans were invincible, proving they could be beaten. Malta, against all odds, became an everlasting symbol of heroic resistance. It showed the world what a small group of determined people could achieve against an overwhelming force. Picture this, 1565. The tiny island of Malta becomes the stage for one of history's most epic battles. On one side, the mighty Ottoman Empire, with a massive fleet and 40,000 elite soldiers, ready to conquer. On the other, the Knights of St. John and a few thousand Maltese locals, outnumbered almost 7 to 1. Their chances, seemingly zero. But this wasn't just a battle for land. It was a battle of will. For months, under a scorching sun, This small band of defenders refused to break. They faced relentless cannon fire, brutal assaults, and dwindling supplies. They weren't stronger. They weren't better equipped, but their courage